What if everything you've been told about African Americans was wrong? What if they weren't merely descendants of Africa, but of royalty, the tribe of Judah itself? And what if the other so-called lost tribes of Israel never vanished at all? What if they've been here the entire time, in Haiti, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and scattered across Africa's ancient lands? For centuries, the truth has been hiding in plain sight. They told us the tribes were lost to time, scattered, broken, forgotten. But the trails of history tell another story. Migration paths, ancestral customs, prophecies, all connecting like fragments of a divine code. These tribes didn't vanish, they journeyed. And today their bloodline runs through the very people the world tried hardest to erase. Now, let's break it down. Judah, the black Americans, descendants of kings, carried across the ocean in chains. Levi, the Haitians, guardians of a sacred lineage. Levi, the priestly line, guardians of the sacred flame, keepers of wisdom that once lit the temples of old. Their spirit burns bright in Haiti, a people whose fire refuses to die. Benjamin, fierce and proud, the warriors of Jamaica and the West Indies, standing tall in rhythm and rebellion, their songs echoing the battle drums of their ancestors. Ephraim, the seed of Joseph, lives on through Puerto Rico, their resilience carved into island winds. Manasseh, their brother tribe, flows through Cuba and the Dominican Republic, their destinies forever intertwined. Simeon shares the same soil, the island of Hispaniola, bound by faith, divided by empire. Gad, the First Nations, the native tribes of the Americas, dispossessed yet defiant, their story mirroring the ancient warriors of Israel. Reuben, scattered across South America, from Brazil to Suriname, their lineage hidden beneath centuries of conquest. Issachar, the laborers of Mexico, fulfilling prophecy through strength and endurance, tied to the very soil they till. Zebulun, Central America, from Guatemala to Honduras, the people between the seas bridging worlds once lost. Asher, the coastal lands of Africa, blessed with oil, abundance and power. Naphtali, the Pacific Isles, swift, free and untamed like deer in open plains. Dan, scattered across West Africa, their memory preserved in names, traditions and the rhythm of their migrations. Now, pause. This is no coincidence. This is a map, a hidden lineage disguised by empire and time. The tribes were never lost, only renamed, reclassified, rewritten. Follow the roots, trace the migrations, listen to the heartbeat of each culture, and the truth becomes undeniable. It all begins with Judah, the tribe of kings, the bloodline of David and Solomon. Prophecy said Judah would be scattered, enslaved, mocked and despised, yet never destroyed. Look at the transatlantic slave trade. Millions torn from West Africa, stripped of names and language, bound in iron and carried across the sea. That was not chaos, that was fulfillment. Judah became the backbone of America, builders, dreamers and fighters, yet the most hated among nations. They sang captivity like psalms turned into gospel, marched like prophets reborn, and moved with the unbroken pride of royal blood. That is Judah, the descendants of kings and queens, exiled yet destined to rise again. Their story is exile and return, destruction and divine endurance. From Babylon to America, prophecy follows them. Every struggle aligns with their lineage. Every triumph whispers of who they truly are. Even their art speaks. Gospel, psalms reborn in song. Blues, mourning set to melody. Hip-hop, modern prophecy on rhythm and fire. Judah never stopped speaking. The world simply forgot how to listen. Across the waters, Levi still burns in Haiti. Benjamin roars in Jamaica. Simeon sings on shared soil. Ephraim and Manasseh carry Joseph's light through the Caribbean. Each tribe scattered, each tribe alive, each one still carrying its ancient purpose into the modern age. And it all begins with Judah. Because once you understand Judah, their captivity, their resilience, their unshaken spirit, the entire map of the lost tribes begins to reveal itself. Judah's story has always been one of exile. In ancient times, they were the last kingdom to fall, conquered by Babylon, chained and carried into foreign lands. Prophets wrote of them weeping by strange rivers, singing songs of Zion in lands that didn't know their God. Now look at the story of African Americans, torn from their homeland, stripped of language, of names, of memory, and yet still singing, still marching, still alive. The echoes aren't symbolic, they're exact. Scripture said Judah would be taken away in ships, scattered and enslaved among nations. What else does the transatlantic slave trade look like, if not the prophecy made flesh? Judah was told they would be mocked, called by new names, despised by the nations around them. Does that not sound like centuries of being called everything, except who they truly are? The traders knew. They didn't just raid Africa at random. They targeted the coasts of West Africa, where remnants of ancient Hebrew culture still lingered. Families who practiced circumcision, names that carried Hebrew echoes, traditions that told of a homeland far beyond the desert. They knew they weren't just capturing Africans, they were taking Israelites. And once across the sea, Judah bore the heaviest chains. They were enslaved, segregated, imprisoned, hunted, every system crafted to break them. But they refused to disappear. That's Judah's mark, endurance in the face of extinction. Look closer at the music, the soul of their survival. Negro spirituals weren't just songs. They were hidden scriptures, psalms in disguise. Songs of Moses, songs of exile, songs of deliverance whispered through chains. Go Down, Moses, wasn't a hymn. It was a memory. Judah remembering who they were, even when they couldn't speak it out loud. And as centuries turned, their music evolved. Gospel, blues, jazz, hip-hop. Not random genres, but living testaments. The sound of a tribe that never forgot its rhythm. The language of a people who turned pain into prophecy. Judah never stopped singing, they just changed the instruments. These aren't just songs. They're Judah's language. Their way of remembering, their way of prophesying through rhythm and rhyme. The same way David played his harp to drive away despair, Judah beats drums and bends words into power, to heal, to resist, to lead. And leadership? Judah still leads. In Scripture, Judah marched first into every battle. In America, Judah has led every fight for justice, from civil rights to cultural revolutions. They move first. They set the tone. They shake nations. Judah's captivity built America's economy, but Judah's resilience built its soul. The kings became slaves, but the slaves became voices too loud to silence. That's Judah, royal blood disguised in chains, and that's why the world worked so hard to erase their name. But Judah isn't the only heartbeat in this map. Across the waters, another tribe kept its flame alive, Levi. If Judah is the tribe of kings, Levi is the tribe of priests. In ancient Israel, they were never given land. Their inheritance was spiritual fire. They taught, they ministered, they guarded the sacred flame. Now look to Haiti. The match is undeniable. A nation that burned brighter than empire. The Haitian Revolution wasn't just rebellion. It was a spiritual eruption. Men and women bound in chains rose up through faith, through ritual, through unbreakable conviction, and shattered the power of one of the mightiest empires on earth. That's Levi energy. That's priestly fire reborn. Levi's purpose has always been to guide, to awaken, to stand between heaven and earth. Haiti has carried that same burden and that same blessing. From voodoo ceremonies that sparked revolts to generations of unbroken spirit, they have been priests in exile. And like Levi in Scripture, Haiti has paid dearly for its divine fire. The world calls them cursed, isolates them, strangles them with debt and disaster. Yet through it all, the fire refuses to die. Levi's drums still thunder with ceremony. Their songs still echo with prayer. Their endurance is prophecy in motion. A nation that burns but will not be consumed. They don't bow. They lift. That's Levi. Priests in exile, standing tall through the storms of history. But Levi doesn't stand alone. Sharing the island of Hispaniola with them is another ancient house, Simeon. Where Levi carries the sacred fire, Simeon wields the warrior's grit. Together they echo an old alliance, a bond written in prophecy and sealed in struggle. But before we walk the lands of Simeon, look one island over, to Jamaica. Because if Levi burns in Haiti, then Benjamin roars in Jamaica. Benjamin's story has always been one of warriors who refused to kneel. In the ancient world, they were the smallest tribe of Israel, but what they lacked in number, they made up for in fury. The scriptures called them archers, fierce, precise, fearless. And now look to Jamaica and the West Indies. The spirit of Benjamin is alive in every mountain and rhythm. From the Maroons who broke free from plantations and built their own nations in the hills, to the rebels in Trinidad and Barbados who defied the empire's whip, Benjamin never bowed. They fought, they resisted. They won freedom on their own terms. That's Benjamin energy, raw, defiant, alive. Even their music carries that fire. Reggae, dancehall, dub. These aren't just sounds. They're battle cries wrapped in melody, protest in rhythm, prophecy in bass. When Bob Marley sang of Babylon and redemption, he wasn't just singing as he was channeling something ancient. Benjamin's roar through a microphone. And notice this, Judah and Benjamin have always moved side by side. When Israel's kingdom split, Judah and Benjamin remained united. Centuries later, across oceans and chains, they still stand shoulder to shoulder. African Americans and Jamaicans, Judah and Benjamin, brothers in rhythm, rebellion and resilience. Benjamin's flame is loud, it's unyielding. It's the spirit of an island that refuses to be tamed. The world calls it swagger, but history knows it as Benjamin, a tribe still alive and roaring. And beyond Jamaica's shores, Joseph's bloodline flows. Ephraim and Manasseh, sons of Joseph, the dreamer who rose from slavery to save nations. Their story was one of exile turned to elevation. And their descendants? They would become a multitude of nations. Jacob blessed them both, saying Manasseh would rise strong, but Ephraim would grow greater, his name carried across many peoples. Now look across the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Cuba. Cultures bound by resilience, rhythm, and brotherhood. Islands that mirror Joseph's blessing, scattered yet strong, bearing the mark of those who turned suffering into survival. These are not coincidences. They are echoes, ancient tribes reborn in new lands, still carrying the spirit of a story that refuses to die. Manasseh, two island nations bound by shared struggle and history, yet each carrying its own distinct heartbeat. Ephraim, the Puerto Ricans, perfectly mirror that prophecy of becoming a multitude of peoples. Puerto Rico has always stood between worlds, once under Spain, now claimed by the US. Yet within its people flows a blend of African, native, and Hebrew roots. Their identity is layered, rich, and global in scope. Ephraim has always represented expansion, growth through fusion. And Puerto Rico lives that truth through music that transcends borders, migration that reshapes nations, and culture that circles the globe. Then comes Manasseh, the Cubans and Dominicans, symbols of endurance and unyielding spirit. Look at Cuba, holding its identity through centuries of foreign control, refusing to bow. Look at the Dominican Republic, forever linked to Haiti, echoing the spiritual flame of Levi and the warrior bond of Simeon. Manasseh's essence is perseverance, the power to stand firm when the world presses hard. That's their legacy. And just like their ancestor Joseph, who was enslaved, exiled, and yet rose to power in a foreign land, these peoples, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, have lived that same arc. Conquered, colonized, enslaved, but still standing tall, their rhythm, faith, and family stronger than steel. They carry Joseph's light through every generation. So far we've mapped Judah in America, Levi in Haiti, Benjamin in Jamaica, and Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, across Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic. But the map doesn't stop at the islands. Some tribes never crossed the ocean. They remained rooted deep in the Americas. Now we come to Gad and Reuben, their footprints etched across Native and South America. In Scripture, Gad was the troop, fierce, relentless, built for battle. Reuben, the firstborn, carried a spirit both turbulent and strong. Now imagine the native nations of North America, the first peoples of the land. Imagine the tribes of South America, from Brazil to Suriname. Can you see it? Gad and Reuben still walking this earth. Let's begin with Gad, the native nations. From the start, they were warriors. They fought back against invaders, guarded their homeland, and endured centuries of betrayal and bloodshed. Gad was always the tribe that would be attacked, beaten down, yet rise again in the end. And that's the story of the native peoples. Pushed onto reservations, stripped of their ways, yet still breathing, still moving to the old rhythms, still remembering who they were. Now take Reuben, the firstborn who lost his birthright, scattered, often overlooked, yet still part of the story. Doesn't that sound like South America, a land where millions of indigenous and Afro-descended people live, their impact buried under centuries of silence, yet their roots run deeper than the soil itself? Brazil, Guyana, Suriname, places where bloodlines mixed, cultures merged, and memories refused to die. Reuben's inheritance may have been lost, but his mark never faded. Together, Gad and Reuben remind us of something powerful. The tribes didn't just vanish or drift into myth. They crossed waters, took root in new worlds, and carried Israel's warrior fire and firstborn legacy across the Americas. Now the map begins to focus. If Gad represents the warrior nations of the north and Reuben embodies the firstborn spirit in the south, then who carries the banners of Issachar and Zebulun? Look closely. Mexico and Central America hold the answer. Issachar was called the strong donkey, the worker bound to the land bearing heavy burdens. Zebulun was promised a home by the sea, between waters, living through trade and travel. And what is Mexico if not Issachar reborn? A people known for their strength, endurance, and unshakable tie to the land. The hardest workers in the Americas, not by stereotype, but by destiny. In the fields, on the roads, in the cities, Issachar's prophecy lives on. But it was never just about labor. It was about resilience. They carry weights others can't, yet they rise again. That's Mexico's song, burden and blessing intertwined. Then comes Zebulun, the nations cradled between two seas, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama. Lands defined by coasts, by ships and ports, by trade and passage. Zebulun's fate was to dwell between waters, to live by movement and exchange. And what defines Central America today, if not that? A living bridge between oceans, a meeting place of cultures and destinies. Together, Issachar and Zebulun show why the indigenous and Afro-descended peoples of the Americas echo the spirit of ancient Israel, connected not just by history, but by prophecy itself. Their food, their festivals, their music, even the way they survived centuries of oppression, it's prophecy unfolding before our eyes. If Issachar and Zebulun show us Israel breathing in Mexico and Central America, then the next trail leads us home, across the Atlantic, back to Africa itself. Because the stories of Asher and Naphtali stretch from the shores of Africa to the scattered islands of the Pacific, places rich in oil, beauty, and the fire of free-spirited people. We just walked with Issachar through Mexico and with Zebulun across Central America. But the path doesn't end there. Some branches of Israel reached further, settling along Africa's western coasts and into the far blue horizons of the Pacific. That's where Asher and Naphtali rise. Asher was blessed with abundance. Out of Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. His inheritance was tied to fertile land, overflowing with oil, food, and treasure. Look at Africa's coastal nations, Nigeria, Ghana, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, regions glistening with oil, gold, and minerals, the very same riches that made them targets for centuries of plunder. Asher's gift was prosperity, but that blessing came with a curse, envy, invasion, and exploitation. The story of Africa's coasts still carries that wound. And then there's Naphtali. Scripture calls him a hind let loose, swift as a deer, graceful and free. a voice that brings forth goodly words. His essence is movement, agility, and beauty in expression. And where do we see that today? Look to the Pacific, the Polynesians, Tongans, Samoans, Hawaiians, people of rhythm, strength, and soul. Their dances, their chants, their language, they flow like waves and leap like deer across the vast waters, scattered yet alive. Asher's abundance and Naphtali's freedom tell the same truth. Israel's story never stayed in one land. It spread across continents, across oceans, living on in the very people the world calls by other names. They spread wide, from Africa's golden shores to the farthest islands kissed by the sea. Prophecy said the tribes of Israel would be scattered to the four corners of the earth. Asher and Naphtali proved that this scattering wasn't poetry. It was prophecy fulfilled, written across oceans and continents. And as we follow that map further, two more tribes rise from history's shadows, Dan and Simeon. One scattered through West Africa, the other sharing an island home with Levi in Hispaniola. Together, they show how Israel's legacy bends back on itself, intertwining through the very same lands we've already traced. Dan's story has always been complicated. In Scripture, Dan was a wanderer, a tribe known for straying, for struggle, yet carrying a fierce and unbreakable spirit. Wherever they went, they left their mark. Today, that mark runs deep across West Africa, written in tribal names, in customs, in the rhythms of ancient life that still echo with Hebrew memory. Look at Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, the towns whose names whisper of Dan, the traditions of circumcision, the faint echoes of Hebrew woven into local languages. Dan's trail runs through them all. Even the rivers and territories bearing his name trace the prophecy. Dan shall judge his people. Dan shall be a serpent by the way. He scattered, but he left his footprints everywhere. Now, Simeon. If Levi's spirit lives in Haiti, then Simeon's fire burns in the Dominican Republic. Two tribes, two nations, sharing one island, one story, just like their ancient brothers, divided yet bound by blood. Simeon was known for passion, for intensity, for a spirit that could divide and unite all at once. Doesn't that mirror the island's history? Haiti and the Dominican Republic, forever connected, yet torn apart by race, politics, and colonial design. Levi, the priest. Simeon, the warrior. Two energies, sharing the same soil. The Dominican spirit carries that Simeon flame, bold, proud, full of rhythm and fire, yet marked by centuries of division. And still, Simeon's identity endures, echoing its ancient role. Powerful, unyielding, unforgotten. With Dan scattered through West Africa and Simeon rooted in the Caribbean, the picture nears completion. But one thread still ties it all together, Judah's brothers, Issachar and Zebulun, and the final path that connects them all through time. Because this is where prophecy collides with history, where the scattering of Israel meets the transatlantic slave trade itself. We've traced the tribes, Judah in America, Levi in Haiti, Benjamin in Jamaica, Joseph's sons across the Caribbean, Gad among the native nations, Reuben in South America, Issachar in Mexico, Zebulun in Central America, Asher in Africa, Naphtali in the Pacific, Dan in West Africa, Simeon in the Dominican Republic. Now the question echoes louder than ever. How did they get there? The answer begins long before Columbus, long before the Middle Passage turned oceans into graves. It begins in 722 BCE, when the Assyrian Empire rose against the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes strong. Assyria conquered them, scattered them across foreign lands, tore them from their homeland, and history recorded their disappearance. They became the lost tribes. But lost never meant gone. It meant they moved. They adapted, survived, carried fragments of their identity like embers through exile. They became wanderers, traders, refugees, a people in motion. Over centuries they drifted south, filtering into Africa. They mixed with the locals, built new communities, and kept echoes of Israel alive, in their songs, their names, their laws, their ways of worship. Then Babylon rose, And Judah and Benjamin were scattered too. By the time Rome ruled, Israel was already woven across Africa and the Middle East, and that's why when you look at Africa today, you still see those echoes, the ancient signs written not on scrolls but in life itself, circumcision before foreign influence ever came, naming traditions tied to meaning and lineage, dietary laws that mirror the Torah, clan systems, and oral storytelling that sound almost biblical. Israel was already there, long before the slave ships came. Then the 1500s arrived, and the world changed. The transatlantic slave trade erupted like a storm. And where did the traders strike first? West Africa, the very region where exiled Israelites had lived for generations. They weren't just taking Africans. They were taking Israelites hidden in plain sight, families whose Hebrew roots had blurred through time, but whose spirit, customs, and covenant still lingered beneath the surface. Prophecy had spoken it long before. Israel would go into slavery in ships, scattered among nations mocked by bywords, stripped of name and heritage. And the slave trade, it fulfilled every line. Millions torn from West Africa, sent to the Americas, the Caribbean, and South America. That wasn't random, that was prophecy unfolding. Look at the destinations: Judah in America, Levi in Haiti, Benjamin in Jamaica, Ephraim and Manasseh in Puerto Rico and Cuba, Reuben in Brazil, Issachar in Mexico, Zebulun in Central America. It's as if the ancient tribal map was being redrawn by the tides of history, as if exile itself was being reset. This was the Great Migration, from Assyria to Africa, from Africa to the Americas, from exile to captivity to endurance, always scattered but never erased. And how do we know it wasn't coincidence? Because the fingerprints remain. Circumcision, practiced in West Africa long before Europeans arrived. Dietary laws, communities that refused pork, kept sacred food codes echoing Leviticus. Spiritual songs that still cry out to one creator, one ancestral covenant. The trail was never lost. It was only hidden, waiting to be remembered. These weren't borrowed from missionaries. They were remnants of an older fire, ancient traditions carried through exile, unchanged beneath new skies. Think about it. Israel's entire legacy was built on memory. Their history wasn't stored in books. It lived in mouths. Genealogies, prophecies, laws, all passed down by voice from elder to child. Africa carries that same heartbeat. In West Africa, the griots, the storytellers, held lineages just as the Levites once did in Israel. Their words kept nations alive. Their voices were libraries. Oral tradition became survival itself. Then there's the rhythm, the sound of worship. Hebrew praise was driven by drums, by the rise and fall of voices answering each other, call and response. And when you listen to Africa's music, it mirrors that perfectly. Communal, spiritual, unstoppable. When Judah's descendants were enslaved in America, that rhythm didn't die. It evolved. It became spirituals, then gospel, then blues, jazz, hip-hop. Every beat still pulsing with the same ancient soul, the cry of a people who never forgot how to talk to heaven through rhythm. Even the names tell the story. African names echo Hebrew meanings, words for God, family, promise, covenant. They surface again and again, refusing to disappear through centuries of exile and bondage. And the festivals? Look closer at Africa's harvest feasts, purification rites, coming-of-age ceremonies. They mirror the holy days of Israel, Passover, tabernacles, only stripped of their old names, yet still alive in practice and spirit. These are the fingerprints, signs that this story isn't built on fantasy or guesswork. It's carved in culture, in customs, in rhythms, in laws, in the survival instincts of people who refuse to forget. From ancient Israel to modern Africa and the scattered diaspora, the thread never broke. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. The lost tribes weren't lost at all. They live in the drums, in the songs, in the languages and faces of millions who still carry Israel's flame. But this story doesn't belong to the past. It's awakening now. Across Africa, the Caribbean, the Americas, people are rising, remembering, realizing who they've always been. For centuries, Their truth was buried beneath lies. History said they vanished. Religion said it was metaphorical. But now, the descendants of exile are remembering their names. The lost tribes are finding their voice again. These weren't traditions imported by European missionaries. They were echoes of something ancient, preserved through exile and time. Think about it. Israel's entire heritage was built on memory. Before ink met parchment, everything, laws, lineages, prophecies, lived through the spoken word. Across Africa, the same system endured. West African griots guarded genealogies, just as the Levites once guarded temple records. For both peoples, oral memory wasn't just culture, it was survival. Then there's the heartbeat of rhythm. Ancient Hebrew worship pulsed with drums, chants, and call and response songs. Sound familiar? That same pattern still thrives in Africa's villages, and later in the plantations of America. When Judah's descendants were enslaved, their songs evolved into spirituals, then gospel, blues, jazz, and hip-hop, each carrying that same ancient rhythm through centuries. Even names carry clues. African languages echo Hebrew tones and meanings, words for God, family, covenant, repeating across generations like whispers that refuse to die. And the festivals, Africa's harvest feasts, purification rites, and coming-of-age ceremonies mirror Israel's sacred days. Passover, Tabernacles, Pentecost, even when stripped of their old names. The form remained. The spirit survived. These are not coincidences. They're fingerprints, scattered across cultures, lands, and centuries, tracing one story. A map not drawn in ink, but in song, lore, rhythm, and resilience. From ancient Israel to modern Africa and the diaspora, the thread never broke. The more you search, the clearer it becomes, and the lost tribes were never lost. They're alive, in the culture, in the music, in the faces of millions who still carry the fire of Israel within them. And now, that fire is rising again. Across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, people are awakening, remembering who they are. The lost tribes are reclaiming their names. For generations, history buried this truth. Books told us the tribes vanished. Churches said it was only symbolic. Hollywood painted our kings and prophets with pale faces. But the silence is breaking, and the world is beginning to remember. Judah in America now sees that their endurance through slavery wasn't luck, it was prophecy. Haitians, the sons of Levi, are rediscovering their priestly lineage. The same spiritual authority that helped them forge the world's first free Black Republic. Jamaicans are awakening to Benjamin's fierce warrior spirit, one that has roared across every generation. In Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, echoes of Ephraim and Manasseh rise again, Joseph's blessing reborn after centuries of exile. Even Simeon and Levi, sharing one island, Hispaniola, now recognize their unity as destiny, not coincidence. Look to Africa. From Nigeria to Ghana to Sierra Leone, voices are rising. We are Israel. Among the Igbo of Nigeria, ancient customs, circumcision, purity laws, even ark-like shrines, point back to the Torah. In Ethiopia, the Beta Israel community fought for centuries to preserve their faith. From the Lemba in southern Africa to countless tribes across the continent, the story repeats. Israel never vanished. It was hidden in Africa all along. And these aren't just academic theories. Families still pass the stories down. Proverbs, songs, and names, once dismissed as folklore, suddenly align with scripture. Coincidences melt into connections. Fragments become a mirror. This awakening is global. From African Americans declaring, "We are the chosen," to Haitians linking their revolution to ancient prophecy, to Mexicans and Native Americans tracing their lineage beyond colonial lies, the lost tribes are remembering. And with every revelation comes a question. Why was this truth hidden? Why did schools erase it? Why did churches ignore it? The answer is simple and heavy. Power. Because if the world had known who these people truly were, that Judah's sons in America were royal blood, that Levi's descendants in Haiti were priests, that Gad's children in Native America carried prophetic destiny, then slavery, colonization, and genocide would never have found justification. To enslave a people, you must first erase their name. Colonial powers knew exactly who they were taking. Missionaries recorded tribes with Hebrew laws. European traders described African customs that mirrored Israelite ones. The truth was never lost, it was buried, and now it's awakening. These weren't secrets hidden in shadow. They were truths deliberately suppressed. Because if Judah ever discovered they were Judah, the chains of captivity would have shattered. If Israel ever remembered who they truly were, the entire foundation of white supremacy would have crumbled. So history was rewritten. Israel was painted white. The African presence in the Bible was erased. Egypt was remade as Europe on movie screens. Moses was given Scandinavian features. Jesus was crowned with blonde hair and blue eyes. They bleached the sacred texts, stripped the color from scripture, from art, from classrooms, until the world forgot that these stories were born in lands kissed by the African sun. But forgetting never lasts forever. Truth leaks through cracks, lies eventually collapse. Oral traditions outlive textbooks, culture outlasts propaganda. And now, in the age of the internet, with research spreading faster than censorship, the truth is rising again. This isn't just a historical debate, it's a rebirth of identity, dignity, and power. Because once the world recognizes that the tribes still exist, and that they are black, the narrative shifts entirely. Colonialism is exposed for what it was. Racism loses its mask, and the once oppressed stop seeing themselves as victims and start realizing they are heirs. And that's what the world fears. Not just Europe or America, but every empire built on Israel's sleep. Because once the lost tribes awaken, lies can no longer control them, and the awakening has begun. Judah is stirring. Levi is remembering. Gad, Reuben, Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, Simeon, and Dan, the scattered pieces of a divine puzzle are falling back into place. And as the truth spreads, one question grows louder. What happens when every tribe finally knows who they are? You can strip a people of land, of names, of language, even of the image of their God. But Israel carried something deeper, a fire that no chain could kill. That's why, even through exile, captivity, and centuries of deception, the culture never died. It only transformed. Take Judah in America. When plantation owners banned drums, fearing rebellion, Judah turned their very voices into weapons of freedom. Their spirituals became coded prayers of escape and hope, songs of bondage that doubled as psalms of deliverance. That rhythm survived, morphing into blues, gospel, jazz, hip-hop. Each sound wasn't just music, it was prophecy disguised as melody. Look at Levi in Haiti. Their ceremonies became sparks of revolution. Vodou wasn't mere ritual, it was the language of liberation. The same priestly fire that once lit incense in Jerusalem now lit torches in Bois Caïman, igniting the only successful slave revolt in modern history. That was Levi, still serving as priests, even in exile. Benjamin in Jamaica, the warrior tribe, turned rebellion into rhythm. Reggae, dancehall, and dub weren't just genres, they were weapons. Each beat was resistance, each lyric a declaration. Bob Marley's cry, "Get up, stand up," wasn't random. It was Benjamin's warrior spirit refusing to kneel before empire. Issachar in Mexico, Zebulun in Central America. Their hands shaped prophecy through labor and endurance. They bore the weight of colonization and famine, yet clung to the soil. They were the tribes who worked, built, fed, and refused to break. Their sweat was covenant, their harvest survival. Even Gad, the native tribes of the Americas, carried memory through genocide. Powwows, sacred chants and dances became scripture in motion. Every story told around a fire was an act of rebellion against erasure. Gad's warrior heart beat on, even when the world tried to silence it. And across Africa, the marks of Asher and Dan still shine. Gold, oil, diamonds, the abundance of Asher's blessing, tribal names and customs that whisper ancient Hebrew roots, Dan's echo through time. The fire never died. Culture became survival, song became scripture, dance became prayer, Family became covenant. Every meal, every rhythm, every whispered tale, all were resistance. The tribes may have been scattered, but the flame never went out. And that flame now lights the question of the future, because survival is one thing and revival is another. What happens when the tribes not only endure, but awaken? The awakening isn't about history, it's about destiny. Think about Judah. For 400 years, African Americans were told they were slaves, then second-class citizens, then minorities. But what happens when Judah stops believing the labels and starts remembering the crown? When they see themselves not as victims, but as royal descendants of kings? That's a shift empires cannot control. That's why this truth is feared. Levi in Haiti, still bound under invisible chains of debt and despair. What happens when they remember their calling wasn't poverty but priesthood? Haiti's revolution was just the spark. What happens when Levi's flame burns again, full and righteous? Benjamin in Jamaica, Ephraim in Puerto Rico, Manasseh in Cuba, Simeon in the Dominican Republic. What happens when these islands stop seeing themselves as scattered colonies and start seeing themselves as tribes of one ancient nation? Then the Caribbean no longer echoes the voice of division. It sings with the harmony of Israel reborn. Issachar in Mexico, Zebulun in Central America. What happens when the hardest working peoples stop being exploited and start claiming their inheritance? Gad and Reuben, the native nations of North and South America. What happens when they realize their struggle for sovereignty and justice isn't just politics, it's prophecy? Asher in Africa, Naphtali in the Pacific, Dan scattered in the winds. What happens when they remember their blessings of abundance, speed, and judgment were never lost, only hidden? This is why history was rewritten. Because once the truth returns to its people, the world changes forever. Because once the tribes wake up, everything shifts. Colonial borders look fake. Racial hierarchies look laughable. Oppression starts to look small. The truth flips the script. The very people the world despised are the very people prophecy honored. And that truth? It terrifies empires, because identity means power, memory means strength, unity means revolution. When the tribes recognize each other across oceans and continents, it creates a movement no empire can contain. That's the fear. That's why it was hidden. But the cracks are already showing. The tribes are stirring. The fire is rising. The question isn't if the awakening will spread. It's how fast. And as we move deeper, the next chapter digs into this revival. How music, politics, and culture are already echoing tribal identity, even when people don't realize it. Because sometimes revival doesn't look like a sermon. Sometimes it looks like a beat drop, a protest, a voice crying out on a stage, a stadium full of people chanting words they don't even realize are prophetic. That's how the lost tribes move in today's world, hidden in plain sight. Look at Judah in America. Every major cultural wave of the last century has come from Judah's survival energy: jazz, blues, gospel, R&B, hip-hop. Each one, Judah speaking prophecy and rhythm. Even when Judah doesn't say Israel, they're still channeling it. When Public Enemy shouted, "Fight the power," that was Judah marching first into battle. When Kendrick Lamar raps about oppression, survival, and generational curses, that's Judah prophesying through bars. Levi in Haiti does the same, through drums and ceremony. Vodou rhythms became songs of resistance. Carnival parades became survival rituals. Priestly fire disguised as festivity, keeping Levi's sacred role alive even when the world mocked it. Benjamin in Jamaica, reggae is his heartbeat. Bob Marley's Babylon system wasn't just music, it was scripture with a bass line. Benjamin's warrior chants spilled from Kingston to the world, preaching exile, identity, and rebellion against oppression. Ephraim in Puerto Rico, Manasseh in Cuba, Simeon in the Dominican Republic. Salsa, reggaeton, rumba, bachata. These aren't just dance music. They're Joseph's sons blending nations, multiplying influence, spreading their rhythm to every continent. Ephraim was destined to become a multitude of nations, and reggaeton's global reach proves it. Even Issachar and Zebulun leave fingerprints in modern sound. Mexican corridos, Central American folk songs. They carry the voice of struggle, labor, and survival. That's Issachar's prophecy made melody, because culture never lies. Even when stripped of Bibles and names, the tribes left their mark, pen in rhythm, in protest, in art. This is revival. Not in temples, but in the beat of drums, the pulse of rhymes, the roar of resistance. And it doesn't stop at music. It spills into politics, into uprisings, into global cries for liberation. That's where the tribes are roaring back to life. The lost tribes didn't just survive through culture, they rose through rebellion. Look around the world. Movements that seem political on the surface? They run deeper. They're rooted in identity. Judah in America led the charge. Civil rights, black power, Black Lives Matter. Always first to rise. Always bearing the mantle of leadership. That's Judah, stepping into battle first, just like in the wilderness. Levi in Haiti lit the flame of revolution. The first black nation to shatter slavery's chains. That priestly fire sparked uprisings across Latin America and beyond. Benjamin in Jamaica turned rebellion into rhythm, from Maroons who defied the British to reggae that called out Babylon. Benjamin has always stood against empire. Ephraim and Manasseh, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, have battled colonial rule for generations. From wars of independence to protests against corruption, Joseph's sons endure. They survive in foreign lands, refusing to be absorbed. Issachar in Mexico and Zebulun in Central America. Look at the migrant struggle. The world calls them laborers. Prophecy calls them burden bearers. Their fight for dignity is tribal identity masked as politics. Gad in Native America fights through sovereignty battles, pipelines, land rights, water protection. Every protest camp is prophecy made flesh. Gad, attacked and displaced, but never erased. Asher in Africa faces a different war. Abundance looted, oil, gold, diamonds stolen. Outsiders plunder Asher's inheritance. Yet resistance rises. From Nigeria to Angola, Asher stands against exploitation. Naphtali in the Pacific battles colonial pressure too, fighting to preserve culture against tourism and empire. Their dances, chants, and defiance echo Naphtali's speed and spirit. Dan and Simeon share the same fight, fragmented identities reclaiming pride, refusing to stay scattered. Across the globe, the tribes are rising, and here's the punchline. These movements speak the same language: freedom, justice, land, dignity. They don't always say Israel, but the message, it's tribal, it's prophetic. And when these scattered tribes begin to recognize each other, when Judah in America sees Issachar in Mexico as family, when Levi in Haiti links arms with Asher in Africa, when Gad's sovereignty echoes Judah's protests, that unity becomes unstoppable. Because prophecy never said Israel would vanish. It said Israel would scatter. And scattered pieces, they can gather again. Fragments can fuse into a nation reborn. That's revival. Not just remembrance, but movement. And the more the tribes rise together, the more the lies that built empires begin to tremble. Every empire in history has lived by one rule: divide and conquer. Keep people from knowing who they are, and you can make them serve you forever. But the moment they remember, your empire begins to crack. That's why the awakening of the tribes is dangerous. Not dangerous to people, dangerous to the systems built on their oppression. Think about Judah in America. If African Americans fully embrace their identity as Judah, the royal tribe, the kings, they stop seeing themselves as minorities pleading for rights. They start seeing themselves as heirs reclaiming what's theirs. That shift alone shakes governments and corporations who've long profited from Judah's labor, brilliance, and resilience. Levi in Haiti. Ever since 1804, the world has punished Haiti for breaking free. Why? Because a nation of priests lit a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Haiti's awakening is feared because Levi doesn't just fight with weapons. They fight with spirit, with ritual, with faith that outlasts bullets. Benjamin in Jamaica. They've always been the loudest voice against Babylon. From maroon warriors to reggae prophets, Benjamin has never been silent. Now imagine Benjamin united with Judah and Levi. Suddenly the Caribbean isn't just islands, it's a force of aligned tribes. Now scale that globally. Issachar and Zebulun rising in Central and North America, Gad reclaiming sovereignty on native soil, Asher and Dan recognizing Africa's wealth as tribal inheritance, not just commodities, Naphtali remembering their grace and power across the Pacific. This awakening shakes the foundations of power, because it brings together what was once scattered. Colonizers thrive on division, Africans pitted against Caribbeans, African Americans against Native Americans, Hispanics versus blacks. But when those labels dissolve and people begin to see themselves as one family, Israel, the system loses its grip. That's why they rewrote history. That's why Hollywood painted over the truth. That's why schools erased the story. Because they feared the moment Israel remembered itself, that would be the moment oppression lost its bite. And that moment? It's already unfolding. Picture it. The scattered tribes awakening to their shared identity. Judah in America, locking arms with Levi in Haiti. Benjamin in Jamaica chanting beside Simeon in the Dominican Republic. Ephraim and Manasseh rising together across Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the islands. Issachar standing tall in Mexico. Gad reclaiming strength in Native America. Asher and Dan taking back Africa's stolen wealth. Naphtali dancing defiantly across the Pacific. This isn't a dream, it's prophecy in motion. And what does it mean for the world? First, it shatters the myth of white supremacy. If the very people once enslaved and rejected are revealed as Israel, the chosen, then centuries of racism crumble in an instant. Every label of less than flips into heir too. That's power. Second, it rewrites the rules of economics. Africa's resources, Asher's oil, Dan's riches, reclaimed as inheritance. No more foreign exploitation. Imagine Africa no longer pleading, but standing tall as the provider of abundance, united by identity. Third, it transforms culture. Right now, Judah drives global trends, music, fashion, language, resistance, without recognition. Now imagine Judah doing it with full awareness, as leaders of Israel, connected to Benjamin, Ephraim, and the rest. Culture stops being just entertainment, it becomes covenant, and beyond that it reshapes politics. If Gad and Reuben reclaim their ancestral lands as part of divine prophecy, then native sovereignty isn't fringe, it's Israel rising. If Issachar and Zebulun awaken to their true identity, the migrant crisis shifts, from illegal immigrants to displaced tribes returning home. It even transforms faith. The Bible ceases to be someone else's tale and becomes the living journal of black, brown, and indigenous people. That shift alone redefines how billions see themselves, no longer background characters in another people's story, but the central figures in their own. A reunited Israel doesn't just challenge governments, it rewrites entire nations. It turns colonies into tribes, slaves into heirs, scattered souls into one unstoppable people, and the powers that be, they know it. That's why they bury it. That's why they fear it. That's why they mock it. But prophecy doesn't bend to power. Power bends to prophecy, and prophecy declares the tribes will rise. We've traced the map. Judah in America, Levi in Haiti, Benjamin in Jamaica, Ephraim and Manasseh across the Caribbean, Simeon sharing the land of Hispaniola, Gad spread across Native America, Reuben rooted in South America, Issachar in Mexico, Zebulun in Central America, Asher lining Africa's coasts, Naphtali dancing through the Pacific, Dan scattered across West Africa. They called them lost. But lost doesn't mean gone. Lost means hidden, and hidden things always find their way back to light. For centuries, the truth was buried. They renamed us, African, Native, Hispanic, Caribbean, minority. They stripped away Hebrew names and replaced them with slave masters' surnames. They redrew maps, rewrote history, painted our prophets with pale faces, and told us we were nobodies. But lies have expiration dates. The tribes didn't disappear. They endured. They survived slavery, colonization, genocide, poverty, and exile. And now, they're rising. Judah never lost its voice. Every protest, Every gospel hymn, every rap verse was Judah crying out. Levi never lost its sacred flame. Every Haitian ritual and revolution was Levi remembering. Benjamin never lost its roar. Every reggae anthem was Benjamin defying Babylon. Ephraim and Manasseh never let go of Joseph's blessing. Every beat flowing from Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the islands into the world is proof of nations multiplied. Gad never stopped resisting. Every native encampment standing firm was Gad holding the front line. Reuben never stopped enduring. Every Afro-Indigenous survival in South America was Reuben carrying burdens others couldn't. Issachar never stopped laboring. Every Mexican worker lifting what no one else would. That's prophecy in motion. Zebulun never left the sea. Every Central American port, every migration path between oceans is Zebulun fulfilling its ancient role. Asher's treasures, oil, gold, diamonds, still gleam across Africa. Even when stolen, Naphtali's speed still dances across the waves of Polynesia. Dan's name still whispers through West Africa, in rivers, in rituals, in memory. Simeon's fire still burns in the Dominican Republic, forever linked to Levi. The story of the tribes is the story of survival. Stripped of everything, they still carried identity, in rhythm, in faith, in family, in spirit. And now, as the world trembles and empires begin to crack, the tribes are awakening. This isn't just a reflection of the past, it's a prophecy of the future, because when the lost tribes reclaim who they are, the script flips. Colonies become kingdoms, victims become heirs, slaves become royalty, and the oppressed remember, they were chosen all along. The world said we were lost, but prophecy said we were scattered, not destroyed, and scattered seeds still grow. Now the tribes are regathering, in music, in culture, in movements, in memory. Judah is rising, Levi is ablaze, Benjamin is roaring, Ephraim and Manasseh are multiplying, Simeon is awakening, Gad is standing firm, Reuben is enduring, Issachar is laboring, Zebulun is trading, Asher is blessing, Naphtali is running free, Dan is remembering. The lost tribes were never truly lost. They were hidden in plain sight, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. So the question isn't, where are the lost tribes? The real question is, now that they're awake, what comes next? If this stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Subscribe to Forgotten Realms, where hidden truths rise and lost voices speak again.